I am Jim Collison, and live from the Gallup Studios here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Called to Coach, recorded on August 28th, 2018. On this special edition of Called to Coach, we'll spend time investigating the experience, emotion, and empirical aspects of each of the element of Gallup's Q12 engagement instrument to know how to use it to increase the power of your and our coaching. If you have questions during the webcast, we do have a live chat room that's available for you right below the main video window, just right down there. Peek down there. If you're listening live, we'd love to have you in there. Best way to get your questions in live, and we will take them. The login button, bottom left-hand corner, then choose the guest account. Take the guest and the number out when you get in there. Put your name in, hit submit, and you're in. That's the easiest way to get it done. You can log in with any of the social networks that are there as well. Best way to get it in, and we will be taking your questions during the program. If you're listening to the recorded version or have questions, any questions about anything, send us an email. Well, I guess maybe not the meaning of life, but most questions we'll have. That is there. Send us an email, coaching@gallup.com, although we know that answer would be 42 anyways. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center, just gallupstrengthscenter.com for all your CliftonStrengths coaches resources and training needs. You can also catch the video in both downloadable and streaming audio for offline listening. That's called podcasting. That's what we call it anyways. You can get that at on the coach's blog. Just head out to coaching.gallup.com. Mike McDonald is our host today. Mike's a senior workplace consultant here at Gallup. Mike, it's always great to see you. You've been traveling around the state of Nebraska. Welcome to Called to Coach.
I have. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, it's amazing. And you and I say this a lot, but it's true every time. It feels like if we take a week off from doing this, it seems like 4 years, and I'm going to claim that as a good thing because it's kind of an adrenaline rush and ride. Preparing for this, thinking about it, and boy, the conversation, the feedback, at least for me, just makes me a lot better. So yeah, you kind of created a little bit of an addiction. So when you were talking about defaults earlier in our discussion, this has been a fantastic default for me.
This next question that we're going to get to, question 7, and I say this about all of them, but it's a really important question in the sense that when we think about opinions and employees and their opinions, this is both really hard and I think actually pretty easy to do in some cases. I mean, I think it's the tale of two cities. And so we're going to dig a little bit into that today and kind of flush that out. Hopefully folks have been enjoying as we are on now the downside. We've done 6. We have 6 more to go. And hopefully these will be instruments you can go back and review. Mike, one of the major parts of my job here now as the community manager, strengths community manager, is to help people's opinion counts. And we'll sprinkle that in a little bit because it doesn't mean everybody gets their way. So let's dig in a little bit and talk about it. First of all, Mike, what's the full actual question and what does it mean? Let's start.
Yeah. Well, Jim, and I was thinking about even preceding this. Should we have a moment? I feel like we should have a moment, right? Because the United States needs to sit up and pay attention to the fact we're celebrating a record. Do you want to talk about that, Jim? Or
no? Go ahead. Go ahead. You break it.
Okay. All right. Here it is. Here's the latest headline. The United States now is experiencing a tie for its all-time high recorded and measured employee engagement. So just imagine a drum roll in the background and the big reveal. So
what is it?
It's 34%. 34%. So we're fighting, scratching, clawing for every single percent, but 34% ties our record high.
Mike, that's 1%. Like we've been saying 33 for the last couple of years, and we 34. So it's just 1%. But you and I were talking earlier. What does that really represent when we think about the United States?
Yeah. So it was Jim and I had probably one of the most fun conversations I had in a while. So we were thinking about a 1% increase, right? So what does that actually mean? It seems kind of small, but then you know what? We broke out our trusty calculators and Googled a couple things and found out that there's 130 million full-time workers in the United States. So 1.3 million more people woke up this morning and were excited and looking forward to the work they were going to do, and they were excited and looking forward to the people they were going to do it with. So Jim and I thought, what does that represent? 1.3 million. How do we drill that down to something that's even more tangible in its form? And so Jim had Siri help him out, and the city of Dallas, has about 1.3 million people. So just imagine in the United States, 1.3 million people, 34% the city of Dallas waking up this morning and they love what they're going to do and they love the people they're going to do it with. Jim and I, we had a moment. We claimed that as a big victory and celebration, and I think we all should, right? Because it literally, it takes, for 1.3 million to have that happen, it takes, I don't know, hundreds of millions of touch points, right, from many different sources to move the needle on that. So Jim and I are excited and optimistic that we think we are trending, and maybe we can take this country and perhaps the planet on towards a tipping point of engagement. So honestly, getting very, very excited about what that represents.
It's a good moment. You might be listening to this a couple years from now as you're going through it, and check those. Yeah. Our most recent numbers, Gallup.com has all that available, those engagement numbers. We publish them all the time. But Mike, when 1% equals 1.3 million, think about a country like India or a country like China, where 1% does not equal 1.3 million, but it's significantly more.
Right.
So we've got work to do, not only just here in the United States, but all around the world. One of the reasons why we're bringing this Q12 series to the coaches is because we know our coaches, certified and non-certified coaches alike, can use this. We've made it simple, very, very simple to use and consume and get moving on it. Mike, let's talk about some resources real quick. Yeah. We always kick off with this, but I'm interested in getting started with this. What are some ways to do that? What are some easy ways to get started?
Yeah, well, as we move the planet closer towards engagement, we do have a lot of powerful resources at our disposal to work with. We've been working with all of them really throughout our discussions. And first and foremost, we've been referencing our First Break Called, the rules book, the most recent edition that has a CliftonStrengths code in it, as well as a Q12 code. So a really agile resource to use when you're working with leaders and helping them understand and coach them through the connection point of their own leadership self-awareness and how it's related to their team engagement. So we're mindful of that. We also have been really leveraging the other book that kind of comes along and with First Break All the Rules. The title of the book is 12. The Elements of Great Managing has a lot of qualitative insights, stories that supplement and support what the data tells us. And then we've been really reaching deep into our State of the American Workplace, our Millennial Report, and our Re-engineering Performance Management Report, and really thinking about the integration of those resources so that we all have our most powerful platform of credibility, right? We want to make sure that we've got the empirical, the data, right? The emotional, the description, what are the stories around that data that really inspire and change behavior? But maybe thirdly, right, the experiential, that we all are not just consultants and coaches, but we're consumers of our own advice, and that we've got first-person references that really bring that to light for our clients. So yeah, so Jim, we're going to use those, and the full question that we're unpacking today is question number 7. At work, my opinions seem to count, represents a ton of our workplace experience and what's meaningful to us when we think about engagement.
Mike, real quick, before we move on to that, I want to be very prescriptive to our coaches. I don't know if we've said this outright, but I'm going to say it now. Your job is to get that book, First Break All the Rules, and give it to a manager and have them take the strengths assessment that's in it. So they now have their top 5, right? That's available in there. And then there's a code for 10 in there, and then they can do their team and you can coach them through that. Let's just be super prescriptive on that. I don't know if we've said it that clear, but that's what we're asking you to do. It's a really great way, very, very inexpensive, great loss leader is a coach for you to go out to do that, because we know that you can really create change in the workplace. Like we talked about that 1% when we reach the managers, right? Yeah. So that's really, really important. I also updated the resources page this week for our reports. So a lot of people think we talk about our reports all the time and sometimes they're hard to find. You know, what do I type in? How do I search for it? I couldn't make it any easier. Go to coaching.gallup.com, click on the resources tab, scroll down towards the bottom, and you'll see report section. Here's one link now. We have a really dynamite reports page at gallup.com that has them all. They're all there. You can't miss any of them. They're all in one place for you. So if you're wondering, where are these Gallup reports and how do I get this goodness? Coaching.gallup.com. Go to the reports tab or go to the resources tab, scroll down and click on the reports, and those are available for you. Yeah. Mike, thanks for letting my opinion matter there, because that's one of those things I just felt like we weren't being prescriptive of enough at times.
No, I love that. Jim, I'm going to make a couple points off that. So one is that should just be your tagline is Jim Collison. I just couldn't make things easier. That's your tagline. Maybe it'll be your epitaph when and if that day ever comes. So I'll leave that up to you to make that claim, but it sure fits for me when I think about you. The other thing that I want to respond to, being prescriptive about that book, I will tell you, and this is part of Gallup's mission. When you think about our economy and the birth rate of new organizations and companies versus the death rate of organizations and companies, and you think about that dire need for entrepreneurs, I will tell you, if you will snap on the content in your coaching from First Break All the Rules onto Born to Build, and as a coaching subset, that where if you can intervene and really equip those new entrepreneurs, I think you can transform and accelerate and create certainty about the success of those new businesses that they're leading on into growth and getting established through the connections made through those. I in my mind, it becomes kind of a business builder series, right? But thinking about how you can coach the mindset of who they are as an entrepreneur through BP10, through the Builder book, snap that on with the self-awareness that you can unpack around their strengths and convert that onto the outcomes of engagement, really has lined up well and has been met with quite a reception and audience from that group of entrepreneurs who desperately crave that kind of insight and coaching from you. So things to consider. Definitely things to consider along the way.
We're 12 minutes in. We haven't talked about this question.
I know. It's amazing.
Sorry. We're going to jump right in.
Yep.
I want to ask you opinion. There's two words in this, opinions and seams.
Right.
So Mike, dig into this. What are we trying to get at with this question?
Yeah. So when we get to the psychology of the request underneath this item is really hear me. Right. And hear me means a lot, right? First off, do I even have a voice? And then the other part of it is, does my voice have any value if it is requested or heard? And to me, I think what we're really getting at, Jim, is the invitation. Like, do we as team leaders, are we extending the right invitation for people to feel like their voice does matter? But then what's our resolution, orientation, and follow through around that opinion once it's been spoken out into reality? And so we can't just passively make these requests and think that we're moving the needle on that. We do have to close that opinion loop. And this is where, in that journey of closing the loop, the momentum and the work and the effort that's represented behind driving this item really gets called out. This is where the trap door is. This is where so many times it doesn't follow through and does not succeed. And Jim, you teed this up to begin with. This doesn't mean that Jim's opinion has been spoken out. We all heard it. And now we have to do what Jim said he wants or needs in order for him to feel like his opinion counts, because we can't meet that need or want every single time, 100% of the time. So now how does that conversation look and feel when it's a slower yes, or maybe it's never going to be a yes? Or it's a slow no that requires some exploration. How does the person feel valued and involved along the way in the process of really executing and closing that loop? And that's where the real art and science of leadership, quite frankly, comes. That's where our coaching comes to play, is those bursts of accountability, those defaults, Jim, of accountability around that type of conversation to bring it on through to where I feel like, yes, I was invited appropriately. It wasn't a token gesture. And there was resolution and follow through that really closed the gap in terms of what I thought I needed or wanted, and then what ultimately did happen. And how did I feel? How did I ultimately feel in the process of all of that?
Mike, this is a question that is often better where it's proactive rather than reactive, and is not great at leading. It's not great when you're leading from behind on this one. Can you talk a little bit about why? That's why we want to get out in front with this one, and we think with managers as opposed to being reactive on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a consistent theme with all 12, right? I mean, great leaders don't come from behind, but I think this item specifically is one of those that just is so poorly placed when it comes from behind, because there's so much pent-up frustration and tension that does build up. And so then when you do ask the question, if you do ask the question, hey, what do you think? It's just this volcanic eruption of negativity. And that makes it hard for a manager then, because now your sort becomes so much more complex and so much more emotionally charged. If we're on our game and we're asking these questions upstream, and then we have a good cadence and cycle of really inviting and drawing these invitations in, but then appropriately giving ourselves the runway to resolve them and communicate and draw people in, and as part of that solution, it's a completely different cycle. It's a completely different experience. And quite frankly, the results are infinitely more enhanced and better as a result. But if you come from behind the game, it's not bad. But boy, it's, people, we all want to be heard, right? And if there's a delay, or if there's never been an invitation, people disconnect. It's a powerful driver of engagement. And if I don't feel like I matter on that front, then I probably don't matter on any front. And pretty soon, I quit, but I still show up for work and get a paycheck, essentially, in the psychology behind that. And I think the main thing there, if I was to encourage team leaders, is again, think about the sort. So this is my own testimony. This element really came to life for me in a lot of ways early in my career. So new team leader, just starting out, we don't have, the 12 elements haven't been discovered at this point. And so I found myself not asking this question often enough, not drawing ideas and opinions from people often enough. And what I found was that I was coming from behind on that. And so I use this metaphor, but the packaging of opinions was not particularly pleasant, right? When I did ask for people's opinions, it felt very negative, a lot of griping, a lot of frustration, and it really put me on the defensive. And so it just disrupts the entire conversation, because now we're not even thinking about the value inside the conversation. We're not thinking about the value of the point of the opinion. It's just an attack and a defense, and a counterattack and a defense. And so we get caught up in all of that tension around the whole conversation. And so really I had a moment of truth for myself where I was like, look, here's the deal, Mike, as I'm having my inner dialogue, you've got to get this figured out, because I know I wanted a culture of idea generation and opinions. I did know that innately, but I also knew that in order for that to be created, not every idea that I was asking for was going to be great. Not every opinion that I was asking for was going to be appropriate or have value, or it might need edited or some amending in a conversation to really refine it, so to speak. But if I got lost in the packaging, if somebody came and they were frustrated, if I only got caught up in their frustration and not in the core of what they were actually saying, then I was going to create an environment where nobody was going to say anything, nothing was going to improve, and quite frankly, we would grow at least stagnant, if not start to dissolve right before our very eyes. So my coaching for myself was, and I think there's some commentary in here for you all to use as you work with clients who are team leaders, is if we're going to have this culture, we're going to uniformly invite these opinions, we are going to get some stuff that's not great. We're going to get some stuff that needs our revision, that needs our coaching and our guidance. Don't get caught up in the initial proposition. How do you join in to hone in on what's the spirit of what that person's really asking for? And then how do we legitimately move it forward to where they have a resolution of understanding or a resolution of application where it really did move the needle. But I knew if we were to get those gems, we were going to have to sort through a lot of stuff to get there. But there's no shortcut to it, Jim.
Mike, the active component in this question is really listening.
Mm-hmm.
And last time I checked, there is no listening theme in our CliftonStrengths, right? We don't have that. So when we think about, as managers, team leads, as we think about using our top 5, how do we really? What are some strategies, to be great listeners? Even though you look at these top 5 and you're like, I don't, walk us through a little bit. What are some ways we can kind of come at this using our top 5?
Yeah, no, I love that question, Jim. One of the things I typically do when I coach team leaders is I think they typically underestimate the ability that they have to actually listen. And there's forces at play that I think have eroded our ability and margin to listen. But I don't think we claim our strengths actively enough when we think about ourselves as involved and present listeners. And so this is where coaches coaching to and through team leaders have such an advantage, because as coaches, we know, right, the value of listening. We know what it's like to be present and available in those conversations. And I think to really help managers, team leaders get their mind into how they can actively involve themselves is I like to have them claim and aim one, if not two, of their strengths that they can really leverage to be a great listener. So Jim, in my story, if I go back through my ability to sort through the imitation of opinions and ideas, I have focus. It's my number 5 strength. And I have a ranger, similar to you, Jim, is my number 7 strength. And when somebody comes in and I ask that question, what do you think? When they start talking, I can leverage my focus and lock specifically in on exactly what it is they're saying. And I can bore a hole through the packaging, if it's not particularly pleasant or attractive, into the center of exactly what the value is that they're feeling, thinking, offering up as advice or suggestions, and draw that back out and convert it to application. But to your point, Jim, name a strength that can't be used to be present and involved and an active listener in those conversations. But I think for so many well-intended team leaders, who haven't developed the habit or the practice of being involved or present or being a coach and being part of that conversation, if we can get them a foothold or a handhold around one or two of their strengths that they can claim as a great listening strength, I think we can start to win them over and train them up to where now they can start to be that coach in that conversation. The other thing we have to be mindful of too, Jim, is the day is giving us no margin, right? The pace and the intensity of the workplace is not slowing down at all. And so when we get that anchor, when we get that strength, we can help reposition that manager's priorities to where they can then listen and what the value proposition on the other side of that conversation could possibly be in terms of whatever performance is valuable and important to them. But the main thing there is, I think, so many well-intended managers, either because of poorly established assumptions or the rate of work in their workplace and how rapid it's coming at them, they make assumptions that I probably know, Jim. I think I know what you're going to say. So you don't even just say it. So I don't ask you for your opinion. Or if you start to mention something, I'll cut you off in mid-sentence and think that I'm going to finish your thought for you. Either way, I've disrupted the value that I've expressed in terms of how you matter and what you feel like in terms of your own internal stock price in our organization. And I've cut our opinions off at the knees. And so even if I was right, and I did know what you were going to say, or if I was right and I could finish your sentence, it sure doesn't feel very good on the other side, Jim. And I'm not creating a great culture of opinions and idea generation as a result.
When I think of, this question of using themes for listening, I know this is going to sound counterintuitive, but I actually use communication to listen. And it comes in the form of asking questions. I need to dialogue through this with them, but I have to keep it in check. It's not about me talking. It's about asking great questions. It's one of those things you and I were talking in the pre-show. One of the things I try to bring to these webcast series is the ability to ask and lead to the dialogue through to get great information out of people by asking great questions.
Yeah.
And that is for me, that's a communication theme. There's some arranger in that and wanting to see this all come together into this big package, this big 55-minute or 1 hour package. And I get a great thrill in nailing these every time at 55 or 60 minutes, right? For me, that's pretty awesome. But as a manager, I've kind of had to learn, like, it's about asking great questions. That's a communication theme for me. That's the way that works. Steve had asked a question. He says, is the need higher in times of great change? And should the process of creating open dialogue during great change be different? Mike, can you respond to that a little bit?
Gosh, Steve, I love that question. And I really agree with it. I think, so I don't want to say I've played some games, but I've moved priorities around or shifted my focus around as I've led teams throughout my career. And I absolutely agree with you that I think that here's what I love about engagement, right, is we can start to forecast. We know that change is imminent. If it's a plan change or something that we can start to see futuristically, we can use engagement as a lens, as a dashboard that we can navigate that lens, that change really effectively, and not just survive it, but actually succeed on through it as an effective strategy. But to your point, Steve, what I think is necessary is I connect opinions count back into expectations and back into materials and equipment, items 1 and 2, and make sure that I've got a cycle of, hey, we're heading into change, team. We know this is in front of us. What's your advice? When we think about what are we going to need in terms of materials and equipment, which is typically the flow of information, i.e. the solicitation of opinions and ideas and suggestions for how we can navigate change effectively, but also clarity of expectations, right? That having that dialogue and everybody putting their ideas and suggestions and advice up on the table clarifies expectations in a way that I think is the strongest foundation that we could possibly have for change. So I personally, as a practitioner and as a team leader, and I think as advice that you can leverage when you put those combinations of the different elements together, I love those 3 for change management. I think they're just a fantastic approach because what we know is a lot of times, right, the most successful strategy could be just what creates the most buy-in. Not necessarily did we find the path of least resistance, but did we find the path where there is the most emotional commitment to that delivery, to that strategy. So yeah, Steve, I think you've hit a sweet spot for change management with that observation.
David also says in the chat room, he says, agreed. He says his context needs to ask questions to understand personal history, right? Yeah. And I think that's such a great way of saying, what is it where I have this need to get things, and how can then I ask the right questions and be able to listen? Because I'm not a good active listener, I write things down a lot when I'm with people to make sure I'm forcing them kind of to have the dialogue while I'm writing it. I learned that as I was interviewing people for jobs.
Mm-hmm.
I need to spend some time reading. Mike, since we are on question 7,
Yeah.
and Mike in the chat room said this: I remember reading in First Break All the Rules that that great managers spend most of their time focusing on the first 6 elements. Could you hit on that a little bit today? I mentioned we're on the downhill slide, and the first 6 elements are key and strategic. Talk a little bit about, we have this kind of hierarchy that these are kind of built. Can you talk a little bit about that as we transition into question 7?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we were to really take to Mike, to your point, what was really interesting when we really discovered the 12 elements, right, is that on the other side of the discovery of those 12 elements, that we also came to find out that there was an experiential order to those 12, that we don't necessarily need all of them at the same time on the same day at 100% intensity, that we have a different phasing in terms of items that show up for us and can lead us on through to a career life cycle of tenure and success, so to speak. And so when we think about those first 6 and how we pay attention to those, we would consider those to be foundational, right? And there's a great metaphor in the First Break All the Rules book that talks about that hierarchical order, if you want to go through and review that. But it works really well with clients when you talk about the metaphor of altitude sickness, right? That if we try to ascend from knows what's expected all the way up to opportunities to learn and grow, if we try to ascend too quickly, it's the same thing as trying to scale Everest at an accelerated rate at which our blood cannot process oxygen capably, and we would die of altitude sickness if we ascended too quickly. So if you think about establishing a base camp and working your way up, it gives you a framework and a guide of which you can use to onboard new people, change management, a variety of different ways, but it helps you make sure you have the cart squarely behind the horse as you lead through engagement. The nice outline, Jim, to your point that it really gives us then is those first 2 items represent kind of a mindset of foundational needs. And essentially, I like the question that's represented broadly across those 2 items, which is essentially, what do I get? Right? So what do I get? And when that answer, however unique or representative it is to me, is provided to the question of what do I get, then I start to ask a different question. And that next question is, so what do I give? If it's been established that I've received the resources and the clarity of what I'm expected to do, then I quickly shift into a contribution mindset. What's my performance and my productivity back to the team that matters? So if I don't show up tomorrow, Jim, you're kind of bummed out, because at that level, it means you have to do more work to cover for me. So I start to get noticed in terms of my performance and productivity contributions. But what I really get excited about, and I think this is where you start to see, okay, so that's that what do I give represents the next 4 items. So there we have our first 6 captured by what do I get, what do I give. The next 4 items really represent this notion of how do I belong. And you could see me kind of sit up in my chair, or if you were watching this on our YouTube channel. This is where I get really excited, because this is where there's the relationship aspect, the emotion, the threads of a culture coming together, where so many people are extending themselves with that voluntary discretionary effort that we described as representative of engagement. And so those items are our best friend at work, opinion counts, mission and purpose, etc. And so we get inside those. It's really about, now, Jim, if I don't show up tomorrow, you're not really that bummed out because you have extra work to do. You're bummed out because you and I aren't going to have lunch together, right? And we're going to miss the camaraderie or that esprit de corps that we have together. That's really our collective sense of identity, and really our personal repetition and habits around each other that we just enjoy genuinely working together because of the relationship that we have. And then the 4th tier really has to do with that identity, where we're completely immersed and blended with the organization and team that we work for. So the last 2 items represent this mindset of how do we grow. And so the person at that point only thinks in terms of the plural pronoun. It's that collective sense of belonging, where I can't separate myself from the success or struggle of the organization. If Gallup's doing well, then I just naturally get caught up in that, and I feel great about that. If Gallup is struggling, then it naturally bothers me. I don't have a discretionary choice to separate myself from how Gallup as a company as where the brand of Gallup out on the weekend, and I'm very transparent about that.
Well, a lot of those areas where those relationship building themes come in, 7, 8, 9, and 10 have a lot of play in relationship themes. And I think if we think about it that way with the domain and we think about teams, it doesn't always correlate exactly, but that's kind of where you want to start engaging. I know for me, I'm not good at some of those, and this is where I'll actually partner up with people who have those themes to be able to remember those things, or make sure we have those times where people can state their opinion, right? Mm-hmm. Or those one-on-ones. This year I've changed because of this series. I actually changed the way my interns can meet with me. So instead of me scheduling them, I said to them, you schedule as many as you want. It can be every week. It can be every other week. It can be once a month. Mm-hmm. Whatever you need, you just get time on my calendar and schedule that. And so that kind of has changed me a little bit to just say, I'm going to let them kind of decide how often do they want to meet with me. I just met with one yesterday, and she had scheduled one for the beginning and the end of the year. And I said, do you want any more? And she said, yeah. I thought, I didn't know no one had ever asked me to set these up. It had always been dictated to her.
Yeah.
So just kind of a new idea, like, oh, I get to decide, kind of different.
Right. Well, Jim, and I think you're touching on maybe the core of this particular item, where when you think about the psychological ownership of that invitation that you created, and actually it probably threw that person off because they've never seen anything like that come at them before. What? You're going to give me ownership and opportunity around my own opinion and the number of touch points that we actually have to integrate that into how we move forward and what I think is best. That's such an amazing statement. So I touched on this earlier, but when we think about engagement as discretionary and voluntary effort, I would love to see, where do we not involve ourselves with all of our discretion and all of our voluntary effort, then when our voice is felt to be connected to a value and an opportunity to move something forward. I mean, you talk about buy-in and the ownership mentality around engagement. I think that's why that item is such a powerful lever. And I think it's great too, right? When we create the highest order of engagement is where managers have created a culture where that value and that exchange of ideas is a free flow economy that isn't contingent on the manager's presence for that to happen, right? You and Jim, you and I exchanging ideas. We have a coaching community that's already exchanging and exchanges ideas and asks for opinions with great fluidity, right? You check out any of the commentary on in the Facebook group, and it's a constant flow and exchange in that marketplace of opinions. And you can see the power that it drives forward in that identity of that group. What it means to belong is that it's not a zero-sum game, right? We don't withhold opinions. We don't withhold ideas that could move us all forward. We're willing to share those and contribute to the success of each other. I get excited about that, Jim, because one of the things that I think it plays itself out into is, and the world is really, I think, in great demand for this, is the notion of inclusivity. And just think what's represented when everybody's ideas are valued and how that sorts through that statement of inclusivity and how we all matter. In fact, when we measure that a couple different ways, one of the things that shows up on our own inclusivity index is one of the items is, my organization treasures diverse opinions and ideas. And think about a culture, Jim, where that's a 5 all the time. Think what that means and how that feels to be a member of a team where there's that kind of fearlessness represented in the ability to share ideas, knowing that I can do it productively, I can do it effectively. The other thing that flips around on that is when we think about organizations where their output is really creatively connected, and there's an expectation around ingenuity of ideas and inventions of ideas. We've got a couple data points where nearly half of employees who say their opinion counts at work also feel that their current job brings out their most creative ideas. So we see a connection in that fearlessness and that ability to think freely, because we know our opinions will be met with the right reception, with encouraging reception and an involved reception. Those who are neutral or negative on that element, on question number 7, only 8% feel that their creativity is well encouraged or well used. So look at the gap. And you think about the world right now, like, you think about everything is about thinking and learning, and it's an economy of ideas. If we don't hit this item right, we're going to cut our not just our economy, but so many organizations and opportunities off at the knees. There's so many inventions out there that are just waiting to spring forward if we can create this culture of opinion counts.
Mike, just yesterday I was in a meeting, and this is a group we've been meeting for the last year or so. And I had shut down an idea about 6 months ago, pretty boldly. Like, no, I know this is what you're saying, but no, we're not going to do that. And come around to yesterday, I'm in the meeting and I realize what they were really asking. And my eyes were open. It was one of those aha moments that you have where you're like, oh my God, I was seriously wrong. Like, I could not be any wronger. As far as the East is from the West, I was wrong in my ways. And I had to have this kind of moment where I had to say, you know what, I've got to apologize. I know I said no to this, and I wasn't listening to you. I didn't fully understand what we were talking about. And now I'm on board. Can we figure, in fact, I took ownership of it. What can I do to set up some things that will help us to move forward with this? Because I think it's such a great idea. I think sometimes as leaders, we're hesitant to admit we're wrong in those situations. We're hesitant to be, I don't want to be the one. So we sit on bad decisions forever because we just, at one point in time, we had an opinion in that, that changed through the process. Yeah. And it was just a great reminder, like, sometimes it just takes time to work through this. As we think about our US numbers, Mike, and the number who strongly agree in this question, with it just being 3 in 10 to this, I think we have some opportunities. There's some direct correlations to when we get this right, it changes things in the workplace. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, Jim, you I think your testimony you just shared is broadly representative of every well-intended team leader out there. I know it connected with me, and I think, but what you pointed out is the exact answer. And what I think is so powerful and important about this item is having the ability to see past the presenting issue or presenting opinion that seems to be coming up. And sometimes it's not that, but there's something behind that commentary, behind that suggestion that's revealing a need, right? That something is missing, whether it's presented well or accurately, or the idea or the opinion is online, there's a gap that's felt. And I love the way you presented that if we can look past that presenting issue or that first initial presentation, there's a story inside there that our great questions can find and reveal. And I think a little bit of our pause to be present and involved can reveal that as well. But yeah, many managers have swung and missed on that particular effort. When we do this right, it's unbelievable in the culture that it creates. And we've talked about that because there is that sense of safety and fearlessness. One of the levers, we talked about this earlier with our re-engineering performance management paper, but remember the first conversation that we touched on is the quick connect. And if we do the quick connect right, which is that weekly, not necessarily daily, but in some cases it's a daily check-in, could be 5 to 10 minutes. If we convert that space and time into something where we have a cadence and a cycle around asking for opinions or an update on opinions and staying in that feedback loop, we know the correlation to engagement is the strongest from that conversation it is any of the 5. We need all 5, but that conversation has a catalytic ignition role to play that doesn't just start it, but also really keeps us in the loop, in the in-between delivery of invitation to resolution that's powerful and important. So, Jim, I think so much about engagement is about reduction, right? It's about how do we take culture, which is so broad and ambiguous and nebulous, but then bring it to and hone it down to 2 or 3 pressure points that well-intended, talented managers, uniquely to their own abilities and strengths, can activate on to move that culture forward. We want to shrink that world down to where it doesn't overwhelm, but rather something real and tangible that they can move forward within the space of their own abilities. So quick connect, the right questions, and creating that space where we've locked onto one of our strengths can be a nice 3-pronged outline that really causes us to drive opinions count.
And I'm not sure it's an agenda as much as it is listening for those, because oftentimes those things come out in the weirdest ways when you don't expect them. Yeah. And you have to be ready for them. This is one of those, I think, that separates good managers from just managers, is that they're always listening for these opinions. And sometimes like we don't want to listen to them because it's like, oh, I don't want to hear that. Like we have a famous example here at Gallup where we had a person always asking, when can't we just wear jeans every day? Like
Yeah.
why can't what? That was actually a leading indicator, by the way, when we changed from more of business casual to dress for the day, right? That is kind of our current dress policy. If jeans is appropriate for what you're doing, yeah, wear them every day. Like we're adults, we can kind of decide what we're going to wear and what we're not going to wear, right? But that opinion years ago, 5, 6 years, 7 years ago, was a precursor to some ideas we're now embracing. And I think we got to listen to those. We kind of shut those down. Nope, it's going to be business casual. Nope, it's going to be business casual. And so I think some of those ideas that are coming out that are rubbing a little bit cross grain are the ones managers really need to listen to. Like, doesn't mean you need to act on them right away, but man, you may have a forerunner, you may have a front runner of an idea that has yet to come. I mean, the American workplace, and I can't speak for the world because I haven't been out there, but I've watched the American workplace change in 30 years. And it's changed a lot, Mike, in the things that we're doing. And a lot of the things that I heard being asked for, I heard, are things that are now happening. And we could have done them a lot sooner if we had just listened in some cases. And there's politics and all kinds of things get involved in there. But it's often the squeaky wheel that gets ignored. And it doesn't mean you can act on it or have to act on it or even can act on the moment. But those conversations can be good ones that can often lead to change.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jim, I think that, again, when we think about the cycle and the process of opinion counts, I think the positioning of the question of what's a 5 is really powerful and important, right? We know that already, but I like to split it up into 2 different perspectives about what is a 5. And what you're talking about really, Jim, is so consistent with engagement, where it's always managing and leading to what's within our span of influence and control, right? If we're going to be genuinely fearless, what do we actually have in our ability to exact or create change within our influence as a team? And I think there's a couple of different effective facets there that we can work with. One is when we're thinking about opinions count, and exactly to the example that you just gave, what does a 5 look like today? So I think about what's the actual opportunity that we have within our span of influence and control today. So what's our actual 5 look like right now? And let's do everything we can with that. Let's just go at it, pour all of our resources, all of our commitment towards what we can actually move today. But there's also the aspirational 5. And Jim, I love this because I think it gives us hope and confidence and extends our ability to grow and evolve this in a way that really feels strong. So even though we may not be at that aspirational place of a 5 today, we've identified what it's going to look like, and we're actually predicting the future by creating the future. Right? So we've looked out aspirationally. We know what the 5 looks like, where we want to be, and we can reverse engineer that back out to our span of influence and control today. And with confidence, we know that with some way, shape, or form or extended effort, we're going to advance towards that aspirational 5. And I think the positioning of the actual 5 and the aspirational 5, particularly around opinion counts, keeps us resolved, keeps us motivated, but also gives us evidence of progress. And Jim, that's one point I don't want to miss in our conversation, is so many times we do a really effective job around opinion counts. We do deliver on closing that feedback loop in a way that there was a decision or something that changed that moved us forward in our ability to perform. And but sometimes if we don't have the right capture and feedback in that closure of that loop, we get downstream. We've made lots of really effective and amazing changes as a result of opinion counts, but we didn't stop and collect the evidence along the way. And so I think it's a necessary conversation for a group to kind of gather themselves. And I think it's a great point of reflection. Like, hey, if we look back past the last 6 months, what were our best opinion counts moments? Where were we heard, and where did we move something forward as a result? And let's just make sure that we don't miss the mark in terms of how much power we've really been able to employ, how much power we've been able to really operate through in terms of leveraging our own opinion counts and taking us forward that way.
One of the things I've really enjoyed in my tenure here at Gallup has been about the data we put behind some of these questions. And, that just because it's the latest fad or it's the latest trend, and people have an opinion around it, it's not always what's best for the employee as well. We think about free and unlimited food. We are in, right, free lunches, or it's just available. We know that has well-being issues with it, consequences with it, right? That's not what's always best for the employee. Putting a speed bump or even low price, low cost, something in the middle, where it allows, it kind of slows some things down a little bit. The other one, in State American Workplace, we talk a lot about remote workers. And I would think 10 years ago, people were like, just let me work from home. Like this would be great. And yet we have found 5 days at home is harder sometimes than when we think about 3 or 4 days at home, or the contact that it requires with the manager. That it's not just total freedom that works, right? When someone is a remote worker, Mike is in the chat room right now, and she's a remote worker, right? As a manager, there's different things I need to do with her. If that's going to be the situation, it's going to work. Now it's harder, right? It's not easier. That made it harder. And I've got to manage her differently. I don't manage Micah, but if she manages me. If you listen to Theme Thursday, you know what I mean. You've got to put some things in place, right? It's not just, hey, I just want to work from home and leave me alone and don't manage me. Like, we know that doesn't work. The beauty of this is in these opinions count, is that the data behind it, like what's best in that, not always what just you want or what people are asking for, but what is best for the employee, right? What creates the most productive environment for that? And I think we got to work those two. We got to kind of work those two things together. And make that, kind of make that come in sync. So it's not just, because I think some people think this is, I just ask and it should happen. Right.
Right. Yeah. Right. The vending machine. Right.
Yeah. And we know that's not best. We know as parents, that's not best for our children. We know as leaders in an organization, having everybody do just what they want when they want just doesn't work. And so there still has to be leadership. This isn't I guess what I'm saying, this isn't a lack of leadership, give everybody what they want question. It's a listening and the opinion seems to count question, and that everybody gets a say, and it's important. And by the way, there's some great ideas that come out of those squeaky wheels, that you have. You need to listen. So it, like everything, right? It's not easy.
Right.
It's a question.
Right. Jim, you one of the things I'm doing this, so at Gallup, we just got done with our most recent engagement results. And so literally just had a feedback session with my team. And what we did is we looked through the results of our scores in our feedback session, and a different angle that we haven't taken before, but I'm really excited about it, is we actually connected and are connecting some of our suggestions for areas that we want to improve, but as well as identifying those areas of strength and connecting those back to our activated values at Gallup. And I get really excited thinking about, we made connections between opinion counts back to, I know it's expected of me, I have the materials and equipment, but I'm excited about seeing what happens in this exploration of connecting forward from opinion counts. And to your point, what's the guidance that our mission and purpose as an organization provides us? And so when you think about opinion counts and how do we sort and prioritize and amend or edit those opinions, having that framework of our mission and our purpose and our activated values there to confirm and clarify and course correct exactly what should happen as a result of those opinions that we're offering up. And it's just a great framework. The discussion yesterday was really productive and meaningful. And I think it's going to tap into a deeper engagement, emotional core for each one of us to know that there's a really powerful why behind all of these decisions and our progress around what happens with our effort around this particular opinion counts activity. And so I would encourage all of you, dive into that exploration. I'd be curious to see what you find out, but I know I'm really intrigued by it and encouraged by the conversation we had in our team feedback session yesterday.
Mike, I've often found that even in my own space, when I've had an opinion, my current manager has been really good about letting me go down that path, but not and to Micah's question, she says, is that an out loud conversation, or is it the best for the employee living more in the space of the manager? My manager was very out loud in that conversation, but allowed me to do it. In other words, this is what I believe, and this is what I think you're going to find. I'm still going to let you do that because you think that can work too. And I got to the end and I realized, you know what, he was right. And it changed, right? I changed my mind and I was like, oh, okay, that doesn't really work. But he gave me the freedom to try that, to see it for myself, to see if it would work. Because sometimes you don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the hard part about managing, is oftentimes giving that space to explore. But that doesn't mean you roll over. I think that's one of those kind of things. Be like, hey, okay, here's and this is my favorite thing to say in these is okay, and here is how we're going to measure it. And if you don't know how you're going to measure it, ask them. Okay, I'm going to let you do this, but how are we going to measure its success? How will it make you more successful than you've been before? And how are we going to measure it?
Yeah.
That brings that conversation. I actually think it ties you and that employee together for some accountability now. And I think that can be very, very powerful.
Yeah. We can lose our way. If you don't put the edges and definition around it, boy, opinions count. Yeah. And that can just be a hot air balloon that just goes on a runaway ride.
We got a few minutes left. How do you want to wrap this as we think about some final thoughts on this?
Yeah, Jim, if I can, I think there's 5 specific ways that I'd really like to put in front of people to consider coaching team leaders in terms of how they really create this attitude and appetite for having opinions count. And I'd love to kind of walk those out as we then think about opportunities for coaches to be involved in some of our own courses and what can happen if they bring some of that content to life to move engagement, particularly opinions count. The first thing, we touched on all these, but I really want to refine them and bring them to a specific list. But the first is obviously the need to individualize. And I think it's really important when you have conversations with people on your team is I love asking these 2 questions to really get in to the point of opinions count. The first one, as I individualize, that I love to think about is what are those things that you really want your opinion to count about or to count on? We all have areas that we're pretty passionate about, areas that we're really close to, and that's probably our opinions count proximity, right? Those are the areas that we care about more deeply than others. And so if I'm a manager and I'm in tune with that, then that's where I'm really paying attention. Jim, if we're talking about our social media presence, I'm going to hopefully make a well-established assumption in the conversations that you and I have had that that's probably something your opinion should weigh in on. If we're talking about redecorating the dining area for the kitchen, I may not ask your opinion on that. Right. And just because I know
I hope not.
for all of us, for all of our sake, but you see where you start to sort that way. And if I ask you that's a question I ask you, Jim, you get to weigh in on where you want to weigh in. So it's a great way for managers to be smart about the questions they ask. The other thing that I like asking is, who do you want your opinions to count with? And each of us has our own constituency, our own audience that matters more to us than maybe some others, or that we find more relevance in than others. And so it's important, I think, to know what the answers to both those questions are. Prioritization, we talked about the pushback that managers absolutely have to fight the resistance, that scope creep on the activity of their day where they are present and involved, but making sure that they are mindful of what that representation, what that statement is about opinions counting, and not missing the mark on it. That when it comes to that conversation, we're not going to mess around, and that statement is felt by everybody on the team. The other part of that then too is getting upstream, that mindset of initiating. I'll go back to Steve's comment earlier when we talk about change management or new ideas or the adoption of things that have already been established. And now we have to think about how do we transition those in. The space and placement of initiation for our team and the incorporation of opinion counts can't be missed in that connection. So if we were to catch up, we would be talking about individualize, prioritize, initiate. And then the last 2 are listen. We've had a lot of good conversation already about activating that strength or 2 strengths that you have that really cause you to be a great listener. Practicing around the quick connect conversation. How do you get yourself into a habit and routine of being a great listener? And then follow through. And that's where it all happens. That's where it all comes either to success or struggle, is what did resolution look like? And maybe what did resolution, even more importantly, feel like as we brought that to a wrap? And not just resolution, did the person get what they were asking for? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But even if the answer is a no or a maybe, how did resolution look, feel, and how well was it communicated in that process of delivery? So hopefully there's 5 handles, Jim, that really help us shrink this and reduce it down to where we can decisively move opinion counts.
Yeah, it should be a manager's top 5. They should have that posted right next to their own top 5, and maybe even think about how do I point my themes, whether it's top 5 or all 34, whatever you have unlocked, and go out there and say, what am I adding to these, or how am I making these happen in my own leadership, my own management? How am I making it happen? Mike, we've got some high power courses and some other things available to folks that are thinking about, how do I want to do more? How do I take this beyond just a webcast? How would we do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have talked a lot, but we want to make sure we're always reminding ourselves of the opportunities to be involved, to really coach engagement effectively. So even if you think about those 5 entry points that we just discussed, those priorities for managers, those really come to life in so many courses that we offer, particularly our Engagement Champions course. It's a 2-day course. When we think about the mindset and the role that can be played as an engagement champion, it really gets into the opportunity to coach engagement through team leaders. So in the course, you immerse yourself, you become a subject matter expert in the data, you become a subject matter expert in the outcomes that are represented in terms of what the data would tell us. But more importantly, you become the transformational connection point in terms of how do we take a culture forward? How do we understand the coaching opportunity through a team leader to drive engagement at the team level by having the necessary conversations and coaching through that manager? So there's a lot of consulting to it that comes to life. The resources are unbelievable, but really get into the mindset of a manager trying to actively drive engagement for their team. It's almost irreplaceable in terms of what it represents there. Another opportunity that we have is one of our flagship courses that goes deep into the world of team leadership is our Leading High Performance Teams course. It starts off with a foundation of strengths, that leader understanding their individual strengths, then leading on through a team, through their own strengths, of what that profile of team strengths looks like as we leverage it towards driving engagement. And so we've got a full day of strengths and engagement that's on display on day 1. The second day then starts off with more engagement and putting that engagement into motion and applying it and pushing towards performance. And then we wrap the second part of that second day with involvement and strategy around the incorporation of those 5 performance conversations that we know take not just performance forward, but the person forward in a way that the workplace wins. And then lastly, Jim, we've had a great kit. If time and opportunity doesn't provide a chance for you to be part of either of those 2 courses, you can get a kit and study a lot of this and involve yourself in a lot of this as well. But the Engagement Starter Pack has First Break All the Rules in it with both codes. It's got a Creating Engagement Workplace Manager packet, so you can start to coach and think through what a manager would need and how they would involve themselves to drive engagement. And then our favorite engagement discussion cards, and question cards that really help draw questions out and answers out from the team, but ways that also can provoke team level discussion where they're learning and building up engagement as they share across with each other. So a lot of exciting opportunities to still put to work.
Awesome, Mike. We'll remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strength Center. By the way, any of those things that we talked about purchasing, they're all available at the Gallup Strength Center store. So just go GallupStrengthCenter.com, click the store button, upper right-hand corner, and available for you. If you have any questions, you can't find something, you want to talk to somebody before you purchase a course, whatever, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Somebody get right back to you with it. Don't forget, I have all these resources recorded. So if you want to see 1 through 6, if you have questions 1 through 6, you're like, how do I get these? Head over to our coaches blog, go to coaching.gallup.com. Don't forget, if you are interested in those courses, you can do it self-service. You can just head out to our courses page, courses.gallup.com. And if you want to sign up for future webcasts, if you haven't done that yet, best way to get reminded. And we're adding 11, 12, and the wrap on this series coming up here this week. So those will be new for you out there. Visit gallup.eventbrite.com. We want to thank you for joining us today. It's always great to hang out with you guys live. And if you're listening recorded, thanks for listening. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.